One of the most memorable moments in Fallout history across the entire series comes a few hours or so into Fallout 3. Well, depending on how much time you spend side questing, that is. If you stick to the storyline, however, you'll eventually encounter a group of power armor-clad soldiers in the ruins of the DC Metro called the Brotherhood of Steel, led by the paladin of their ranks, Sarah Lyons. Her and her squad are attempting to fight their way past a horde of super mutants in order to make it to the nearby Galaxy News radio building to meet up with the rest of their Brotherhood already located inside the old transmission station. Upon reaching the GNR building plaza, the Lone Wanderer and the rest of the Brotherhood are attacked by one final wave of super mutants. Their worries, however, are far from over. And then we hear it. Boom, boom, boom! And then an earth-shattering explosion. Bits of metal and old car parts flying through the sky as something truly horrifying explodes into the plaza. Our first ever encounter with a super mutant behemoth. This moment would mark the first instance of enemies in the Fallout universe that truly felt boss-level worthy. You know, besides the Master and obviously Frank Horrigan. One of my biggest complaints about the Bethesda entries into the Fallout series are the distinct lack of a typical boss enemy. You know, a final big bad guy that you go up against, or like a mini boss that you run into, you know, at different points across the game. Classic Fallout 1, 2, and Tactics all had these big final style opponents. The Master, Frank Horrigan, the Calculator. Given the top-down isometric nature of these games, as well as the antiquated technology that they had to build them on, it allowed developers to focus more on story, dialogue, and RPG mechanics, and thus allowed for more interactions of this nature to more naturally exist compared to 3D RPG-style games. Of course, such elements can exist in 3D RPGs. Elden Ring and the rest of the Souls series are proof positive of that, and they're far from the only examples. When you take Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 into consideration, though, the focus seems to have shifted away from combat and has instead refocused onto things such as world and locational storytelling, which I think is partially why settlement and camp building became such a key feature. Combat is still very much a big factor in the games. However, it doesn't seem to get the same level of extensiveness of these other elements, honed but never quite feeling as robust as other entries. When it comes to the enemies in Fallout, though, specifically the non-human ones, the newer games have been seriously stepping up their game. Fallout 4 introduced us to the massively memorable majesty of the Mirelurk Queen, and Fallout 76 has been doubling down time and time and time again with things like the Scorch Beast Queen, Earl Williams as the Wendigo Colossus, and the latest entry into the ever-growing in size roster, the Ultrasight Titan. These larger-than-life Leviathans are case point for Bethesda wanting to include more massive monsters for us to deal with while wandering in the wasteland, indicating a desire to take the franchise into a direction where the effects of a world ravaged by war and radiation are really starting to show their long-term results. For the keen-eyed among us, you might actually be asking yourself, how does this show an intent when most of these larger enemies are in Fallout 76, a game set in the earliest point in the timeline? Many of you may remember that shortly after the release of Fallout 4, we started hearing rumors about a potential underwater DLC for the game that would take us to a vault located off the coast of the Boston shoreline. Alas, such a thing never came to be, but we do have recovered data files that indicate that such a quest was planned, but for whatever reason was never implemented. The most noteworthy thing about this quest, though, was that, at one point, the player actually would have encountered a quite literal giant squid, one that we actually were able to recover artistic assets for, and which some ambitious modders have even attempted to reintroduce into the seas of the Commonwealth. One single point of evidence for Bethesda wanting to create bigger monsters hardly a pattern makes. I'm sure you are politely commenting to your screen as we speak. Well, dear viewers, have you ever heard of the Maypole? The nightmarish passion project of character artist Jonah Loeb, the Maypole might have been Fallout's largest and strangest creature before the reveal of the Ultrasight Titan in Fallout 76 Nuka World update. Standing the equivalent of 300 feet tall and described as a melting elemental of agony, the Maypole would have been a unique glowing one that the sole survivor could have encountered while adventuring across the Commonwealth. While it is unknown what sort of combat capabilities the maypole may have possessed, if any, we do know that conceptually speaking, the maypole would have attracted literal hordes of feral ghouls that would have benefited from the natural healing radiation that this towering beast emitted. Given the size of this melting monster, it could be assumed that the radius of healing for his ghoulish entourage would have been much larger than that of a typical glowing one, meaning that running into this guy out in the wild would have been a bigger challenge than trying to solo clear Nuka World's raider infestation. Personally, I'm not too broken up over this guy being left on the cutting room floor. Large numbers of ghouls in Fallout are already a huge pain to have to deal with, and this literal healing beacon supporting them would have been a nightmare. Kind of like those Siren Head mods you've seen some people made. Could you imagine walking around a corner in Boston and seeing the maypole standing just a block or so away with a crowd of ghouls at his feet? Players would be setting a new land speedrun records for uninstalling the game. The lost potential of creatures like the maypole and the giant squid left on Fallout's cutting room floor, and the existence of these same kinds of massive beasts in Fallout 76 does, however, beg the question we began this video with. Is Bethesda moving more and more towards larger boss-like enemies, even if just a few of them in select locations? At face value, we might say yes, but when looking at Fallout 76 specifically, these creatures are meant to be taken on by multiple players at the same time. They're just far too powerful to be taken on alone. Does this mean that the future of Fallout games will be multiplayer as well? Or at the very least, these huge boss battles be made easier with co-op or just smaller health bars? Well, I don't think so. RPG is a strange genre in video games, mostly because it can be applied so loosely to almost any game with just like a crafting system or a basic skill tree. In general, though, the core of an RPG game revolves around a level and growth system that allows for both player customization and modability when it comes to their combat style and how they interact with the world around them. Case in point, Elden Ring. Many Fallout fans lament the loss of meaningful dialogue and impactful quests in Fallout 4, which is, of course, understandable considering the capabilities of previous entries into the series. However, when it comes to RPG mechanics, while still scaled back, they are far from lost in Fallout 4. Elden Ring, on many occasions, has been applauded as one of the greatest RPGs in recent years, given its free-form ability for players to grow, customize, and experiment with different stats, abilities, and combat styles. World-altering quest lines are very sparse, however. Dialogue options are virtually non-existent, and very little of what you actually do will have an effect on the game's ending. These very same elements, however, impactful quests, expansive dialogue, and alternate endings, are core elements of both older and newer Fallout games, with the major difference between them being the degree of which they implement things such as stats and skill-related growth. Does that mean that Elden Ring is a better RPG? No, I don't think so anyway, but it does show a focus in what kind of RPG Bethesda might be looking to create. One more focused on engaging combat and story told through the world, rather than expansive person-to-person dialogue or world-altering events. All these things will, of course, exist in future Fallout games, just to varying degrees. Moving forward into future games, though, and more importantly with relation to Fallout 5 and Elder Scrolls 6, these kinds of massive creatures could very well become a larger part of these games, with combat gimmicks or battle patterns associated with them similar to what we've seen in Soulsborne games. Am I saying that Fallout is going to turn into the next Dark Souls? No. But given the massive success of these games, and Bethesda's apparent interest in exploring what role such giant creatures could play in terms of the irradiated wastelands of the ruined United States, it might be an interesting reference point to look at. Fallout games are still going to be Fallout games, long into the future, and most likely will never look or play like Dark Souls. When it comes to expertly integrating monsters bigger than a 3-story building, we might be wanting to look at the Souls games for some tips and tricks. Or I could just be wrong. But hey, that's just my opinion. And now I want to hear yours. What do you guys think of the possibility of huge monsters like we've seen in Fallout 76 being introduced into the franchise? Maybe not the exact same creatures, but large creatures in scale. Let me know down in the comments. Until next time, I thank you so much for watching, like and subscribe and stuff. And until next time, I will see you all out there in the wasteland.